Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of The Art of Procurement. And I can't believe that we're actually edging towards episode 100 of the show now, and are only a few short weeks away from our 1-year anniversary. And I've had a couple of guests on the show over the course of the last year to discuss corporate social responsibility, so CSR. And the reason being is that I see this as a key area in which we can differentiate ourselves, but also that CSR is going to play an increasingly important role for our organizations. And there's many reasons for this. But as an example, I think that a company's commitment to CSR is going to play a much bigger role in the perception of their customers, whether it's B2B or B2C. That's going to have an impact on brand value. Ultimately, brand value has an impact on pricing power. But I also think that, in my experience at least, it's an area that we haven't really tackled head on as a procurement community. So when you look out there for case studies, examples of, I hate the word best practices, but certainly forward thinking, they always tend to be focused around the same types of companies who are leading the way in terms of, being ahead of the curve in what procurement can generate in other areas across procurement. And so on today's show, we're actually going to talk specifically about sustainability. And so I became aware of the SPLC, who are the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, earlier in the year as I was researching the topic of sustainability in the supply chains for another show. And I really like what they're doing. And so I invited Jason Pearson, the president and CEO of the SPLC, onto the show. And I was delighted that Jason accepted. And so today's episode, we're going to focus on a couple of key areas. First, Jason's going to share the role that procurement can play in sustainability. And he references a number of examples that I think, I'm going to link up to them actually in the show notes, but that really give examples of how procurement leaders have been successful in making sustainability a priority for their organizations. And then we go into some of the specifics about how to start building a supplier sustainability program. So how you should think about the prioritization of initiatives, what spend categories to focus on. And actually on that front, Jason gives a list, and I think it's 8 of them in the show, both on the direct and the indirect side, of categories that lend themselves to being good target categories when you begin on this journey. Okay, so first, I want to say a thank you to today's sponsor, Zycus, and then we'll go straight into the discussion with Jason. Today's episode of The Art of Procurement is brought to you by Zycus Horizon 2016. And Horizon is an annual procurement conference hosted by Zycus. Zycus is a leading provider of a complete suite of source-to-pay procurement performance solutions, and their 2016 Horizon event is a 3-day get-together from October the 23rd to October the 25th. At the event, procurement executives learn, share, network, and unwind, all within the company of their peers at the Ritz-Carlton in Dove Mountain, Arizona. And I'm really excited that the Art of Procurement is the media partner for the event, and I'll actually be hosting and leading 2 different sessions. First of all, a panel discussion with a number of thought leaders who will consider innovation and are we as a profession innovating fast enough? And then I'll present a breakout session that asks the question, how can we save procurement from extinction? I'm really looking forward to the event and I hope to see you there. For more information, visit artofprocurement.com/horizon. So hi there everybody, and as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm delighted to welcome today's guest, Jason Pearson, to the show. And Jason is President and CEO of the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. So Jason, welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Well, thanks for joining me. And I read that when I was doing my a little bit of research before the show, I read that you described yourself as a social entrepreneur. I just wondered, what is a social entrepreneur?
Well, you may wonder. I think my parents wonder as well. I describe to their friends what it is I do. So I would say a social entrepreneur is just a special kind of entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Entrepreneurs are generally people who figure out how to put together resources, money, talent, ideas, market opportunities to create an enterprise that can sustain itself over time. Many entrepreneurs do this primarily in order to make money. They create business enterprises, and their purpose is to generate a financial return on investment or a profit. What's different about a social entrepreneur like me is that the reason that we create and grow an enterprise, we don't do it to make money. We do it to address social, cultural, or environmental challenges, to serve the public good. We still do everything else that a regular entrepreneur does. We put together resources, money, talent, ideas, market opportunities to create an enterprise that can hopefully sustain itself over time. It's just that the enterprises that we create don't measure themselves on their economic return on investment. We measure ourselves on how much public benefit we create, what some might call a social return on investment.
And so that, I imagine, has to come from a deep place to actually have a motivation to do that. So how did you become passionate about specifically sustainability? I know that's a large part of the businesses that you've set up.
It is. So I started my career as an architect, as a designer. I was frustrated in my early work as a designer by my sense that many of the design questions that clients asked architects to solve were not sufficiently ambitious. They did not really speak to the potential of great architecture to contribute in a meaningful way to a better quality of life for people and even for the planet. And it seemed to me that clients just weren't asking very ambitious design questions, with the result that the creative potential of architects and designers to contribute positively to a better future just was not being realized. And the exception at that time, this is about almost 20 years ago now, was a tiny corner of the design community that was advancing something called sustainable design or eco-design. And this community was asking big, ambitious design questions. How could cities and regions be redesigned to encourage more walking and less driving? How could buildings be designed to use less energy and encourage more health and productivity among building occupants? How could products be designed to reduce the negative impacts of production, use, and disposal? So these were the kinds of big, ambitious questions that I was looking to try to address, and they appealed to me. And I think they're the kinds of questions that we should be asking of each other, and challenging each other to design a better tomorrow. So because that wasn't really the way design was working, I actually quit practicing as a designer, and I reoriented my career toward finding ways to encourage better design questions to get asked, in a way to find ways to create more informed clients so that the next generation of designers would be challenged with more ambitious design questions. And that was really the beginning of my career in the sustainability field. I spent a few years in the federal government working on leadership initiatives to promote design innovation, and then a few years working as a grant maker for a private foundation, creating a program to support innovations in sustainable design. And then in 2003, I got my first opportunity to actually be a social entrepreneur. I was contacted by a guy named Bill McDonough, who, with his business partner, Michael Browncart, has been a leader in the innovative redesign of products to be safe in the environment, using a concept that he and Browncart called cradle-to-cradle design. Bill invited me to move from DC down to Charlottesville, Virginia, to help them start a new social venture called Green Blue, whose goal would be to promote broader adoption of cradle-to-cradle design thinking across industry. And while that original vision didn't last, that is the vision of a cradle-to-cradle organization, and Bill and Michael didn't actually stay actively involved in the organizations, I ended up pretty quickly as the CEO of a new organization with no employees, and spent the next 7 years growing it into a $5 million enterprise with participation from some of the largest companies in the world. And our focus was on bringing industry sectors and supply chains together to really ask better design questions, to identify barriers and opportunities to the broad adoption of more sustainable design approaches, and then developing initiatives to address those. So that's really got kind of what took me from the field of design into this new and evolving field called sustainability.
And so the leap then from sustainability to purchasing, what were the dots that you connected to start looking at how organizations buy?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I certainly didn't expect that when I entered my career, I didn't expect that it would be a career about sustainability. And I actually still don't think of myself as championing sustainability as much as I think of myself as a champion of human potential. I just believe we can do much better as a society in delivering on the promise of a safe, prosperous, healthy, culturally rich future for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren. And I believe that the key to our doing better as a society is to set ourselves better challenges, to apply our collective creativity to the right collective challenges. And I believe that in our contemporary market economy, procurement professionals are positioned in a unique position to be able to influence the questions that are asked of the marketplace at large, and are in a position to ask more ambitious questions and to push innovation in the marketplace in a direction that can not only serve the needs of their own organizations, but can also really advance a positive future for everyone.
So what role do procurement leaders have to play then in trying to advance sustainability? You mentioned then that you feel that procurement is in a really strong position within an organization, but what can we actually do about it?
So that's a great question. It's really the question of the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. And I guess, as I said earlier, I think that procurement leaders are uniquely positioned to help advance the sustainable purchasing movement. They control or influence the day-to-day purchases that an organization makes. And we've seen organizations that have had great success in establishing a sustainable purchasing policy then be able to significantly influence the way in which the market responds to their demand. But probably the best way for me to explain the role of procurement professionals is really to explain the vision for the SPLC and why it was created. And I should say that it's not, I didn't found the SPLC by myself. While it's true that and I think that's true for most social entrepreneurs, we don't just come up with a great idea for ourselves in our garage and go find funders and launch. I think most social ventures, and this is certainly true for SPLC, grow out of collaboration, out of the process of diverse stakeholders coming together around a shared challenge and then exploring ways to address that challenge and then agreeing to invest in experiments that might lead to a solution. And the most successful of those experiments become a social venture with actual power. So in the case of SPLC, an initial group of organizations came together in 2008 in an initiative called the Green Products Roundtable, which was hosted by the Keystone Center. And that roundtable aimed to address the question, what makes a product or service green, that is environmentally preferable, and how can we separate the actual green products and services from greenwashing? For 4 years, from 2008 to 2012, the roundtable undertook a range of activities to answer those questions, probably most notably providing some very influential multi-stakeholder endorsed feedback on the 2012 update to the Federal Trade Commission's Green Guides, which regulate the environmental product claims that suppliers of products can make in the marketplace. And that's really the point at which I ended up a part of this initiative. In 2012, I was hired by the roundtable to help forge a strategy for the future, and we collectively identified this enormous opportunity for change in the upstream demand signal for green products and services. In other words, procurement.
Yeah.
We hypothesize that if the purchasing power of large organizations could be leveraged towards sustainability, we could harness market forces and the innovation capacity of the supplier community to achieve truly revolutionary change in the market. So in the summer of 2013, it was about 3 years ago, 36 organizations, some from the Green Products Roundtable and some recruited as part of the process, came together. These are organizations from public sector, private sector, academic community, and civil society to launch the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. And we like to say that the SPLC was founded to take advantage of a big opportunity and to address a big challenge. The opportunity lies in the purchasing power of large organizations, which by our estimates, organizations like governments, private companies, universities, schools, hospitals, financial institutions, and more spend more than $10 trillion in the U.S. alone on indirect spend. That's 2/3 of the U.S. GDP. And in other countries, that percentage may be even higher. And that spending is done by large organizations is managed by a relatively small group of individuals, that is, by procurement professionals. So from our perspective at SPLC, institutional purchasing is the single largest professionally managed economic signal driving the entire economy. And that economic driver basically is the collective question that purchasers are asking of the marketplace, and the supplier community is then responding with whatever level of innovation is appropriate to the level of ambition that collective community of purchasers are issuing, the challenge that they're issuing to the marketplace. So to come back to your question of what's the role that procurement professionals play, I think procurement professionals are uniquely positioned to inform and influence that economic signal in ways that will result in the kinds of innovation that we need to see to move toward a truly sustainable future. But I mentioned that we talk about both an opportunity and a challenge.
Right.
The challenge is that a relatively small portion of the economy is today trying to realize that opportunity and has begun working on sustainable procurement. Some individuals and organizations have been working on it for decades, even before it was called sustainable. But the fact is that they've been working on it either on their own or within their own industry-specific or region-specific or sector-specific groups to develop solutions. So what these relatively siloed efforts have resulted in is a lot of reinventing the wheel being done by purchasers and many similar but different economic signals getting sent to suppliers.
Right.
Suppliers have been confused and overwhelmed with similar but different supplier scorecards and surveys and have to spend resources responding to those requests instead of innovating and improving. So the vision behind SPLC is to address those shared problems and to collaboratively develop shared solutions that would realize what we see as the potential opportunity of procurement professionals to participate in issuing the kind of collective economic signal that could make a meaningful difference.
And when you talk about big challenges, one of the things that immediately comes to mind is that there has to be desire from an organization itself to invest in, what ultimately may be a higher, let's say, a piece price, maybe not total cost, but investing in innovation which drives sustainability is not cheap. How have you seen companies be successful, or procurement leaders within companies be successful in helping their organizations recognize the importance of doing this and kind of creating a building platform which then becomes the basis of organizations to invest in thinking about sustainability more in their purchases?
Sure. So it's an excellent question, and it is a deeply challenging question for us as an organization and for our membership. As we see it, sustainability provides us collectively with a lens for understanding the world of today and the world of tomorrow. We live and work in an increasingly connected world. We are increasingly aware of the interconnections in this world. It's what we typically mean when we talk about globalization. The fact that, frankly, as in this country, in the United States, we can't avoid going to war repeatedly in the Middle East in order to maintain security of our oil-based energy infrastructure. The fact that our babies can get poisoned by infant formula that's been contaminated in factories halfway around the world. The fact that our towns and cities are being flooded and even destroyed by weather events that are brought on by a climate that's changing because of our own activities. The fact that the tuna fish that we put in our sandwich may have been caught by an 8-year-old child that was sold into slavery on a boat somewhere in the Pacific. These interconnections are real, and they are real challenges, and they are genuine risks to businesses and organizations in the market today. And they can seem overwhelming. They can seem like, as they are encountered individually, they seem individually overwhelming. And then as we encounter all of these connections, it really can seem difficult to think about how to address them strategically as an organization, both as people, as citizens, as policymakers, and as business people. To me, I think sustainability provides us a lens and a language to understand those connections and to develop strategies to address them in intentional and meaningful ways. The reality is our world will never be perfect, but we do have a choice about whether we play a role in making it better tomorrow than today. And those of us who advocate for sustainability are engaged in a very practical conversation about how to do that. From a business perspective, sustainability is simply the name given to a range of very real business risks and opportunities that are increasingly relevant to businesses of all sizes in a world where markets are truly global. And whether a business chooses to acknowledge those risks today or not will likely determine whether they are in business tomorrow, if we consider tomorrow 5 to 10 years into the future. So I would say that the more strategic organizations recognize the risks and also recognize that sustainability provides a framework for thinking about those risks in a meaningful and powerful way, and also provides us a portfolio of strategies for addressing them. That's from a business perspective. I would also note that many of our members are government organizations, and from a government perspective, sustainability provides a language that links what are already public interest priorities for government. Government is already thinking about how to make the world a better place, but it links that historical language of policy and government policy with a private sector language, and in a way that gives both public sector and private sector organizations a practical framework for collaborating as appropriate to work together on shared challenges. Probably for SPLC, that's the greatest value of the language of sustainability, is that it provides a way for public sector, private sector, and civil society to develop a shared agenda and a shared set of strategies for addressing the challenges of tomorrow. But I want to come back to your question was what success have we seen by individual organizations? And we've seen a lot of individual success, and I do want to point to probably the best way for me to characterize that is, rather than trying to describe individual examples, I would point your listeners to a case study library that we've been building on our website, which includes all of the case studies that have been submitted for consideration for our annual leadership awards in sustainable purchasing. Among the case studies listed there, I might recommend looking at a few of the public sector examples, such as the 2015 and 2016 submissions from the District of Columbia, which the leadership award for an overall program in 2016, and is a really great case study on how a champion for sustainable purchasing within that organization was able to build support within the organization all the way up to getting what amounts to executive level endorsement on the part of the mayor for sustainable purchasing activities as part of the city's overall strategic agenda, and then how that played out in terms of practical implementation of purchasing policies and the benefits the city saw both internally and externally from those efforts. I would also, on the public sector side, point to the 2015 winner of the overall program award, which went to Department of Energy for a very innovative approach to motivating sustainable purchasing within a large and decentralized purchasing organization. On the private sector side, I would look at a number of case studies that were submitted by Lockheed Martin, both their sustainable purchasing program and their supplier diversity program. A Microsoft case study on impact sourcing, which talks about the ways in which they have been able to address some serious challenges that they identified in their supply chain through the use of impact sourcing as a strategy. Best Buy's a case study on Best Buy's hybrid geek mogul program. And then the final example I'd point to is probably the most important for signaling both the strategies that are most effective and the kinds of benefits that can accrue to those strategies. And that's a case study submitted by a group called Together for Sustainability, which documents an industry sector collaboration across multiple companies to achieve sustainable purchasing improvements across the entire industry sector. The reason I'm pointing to that is that I think that while you will find case studies of really tremendous leadership in our case study library by individual organizations, it is absolutely the case that the most powerful change has occurred when organizations have been able to collaborate together on an initiative. And the Together for Sustainability case study is a great example of that, specifically focused on chemical products. And then I would point to SPLC as a more general version of that, but there are multiple instances and multiple opportunities of multi-company, multi-stakeholder initiatives where companies are able to get engaged at a lower risk level because they're not going it alone, and with a much higher potential for return because the collective voice of the participating companies is often able to achieve more significant change on the economy of scale that's just not feasible for an individual organization.
Okay, so what I'll do is I will definitely link to those in the show notes for today's episode. I'm going to, I'll come back to the URL for that at the end of the show, but I will definitely, post links to all those different examples. And there's one at the end that you were talking about the power of collaboration and multiple participants within an industry coming together. Where do you even start when you want to do that? So you within a company, within an industry that you're passionate about helping to build a sustainable supply chain. How do you start even talking to what ultimately may be competitors in your field to approach this as a singular rather than on your own?
Great question. So I would, depending on the industry sector, I would say that in some cases, the trade association for many sectors is already moving on these issues. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, in the electronics industry, there's an initiative called the Electronics Industry Citizenship Coalition. I think I got that right, EICC. What that group has done is bring together the players within the electronics industry to develop a shared code of conduct that they expect their suppliers to conform to, and also have helped the industry to develop the infrastructure for reporting and validating the performance of suppliers against that code of conduct. Mm-hmm. So that's an example where a trade association has been proactive in reaching out to its members and offering itself as a host for a conversation about how sustainability can be addressed in a meaningful way at the sector level. The other thing I would say, and I would be irresponsible not to plug SPLC here, is that SPLC as a community exists to afford those opportunities for conversation. And we are specifically designed as a pre-competitive, safe space in which to have conversations with industry peers, including with direct competitors, as well as with your own supply chain, with civil society stakeholders, in order to get a better understanding of where the opportunities might be to move forward, either in collaboration or just to hear how other organizations in your own field have addressed similar challenges. And I know that I can count on getting a consistent response from any of our members when I ask what the greatest value of membership is to them, and they will consistently tell me that the greatest value is being able to network with other members and participate in our online community in sharing questions and solutions across the range of issues that come up when you try to think about the complexity of implementing sustainability priorities within the function of procurement.
So one of the things I wanted to also do today was talk, and time will probably determine how much we can talk about it. But when I was looking at your site, I noticed that you put out some guidance for leadership in sustainable purchasing, which on the outside looked like a pretty comprehensive program to start providing guidance on how to build internal programs and really to start thinking about sustainability. So first of all, in fact, what I'll do first is let you explain what it is exactly rather than me trying to butcher it. But
sure.
What is it that you've built and kind of how has it evolved over time?
Sure. So SPLC's guidance for leadership in sustainable purchasing is intended as a comprehensive handbook for organizations seeking to exercise leadership in sustainable purchasing. Mm-hmm. And because not all organizations will be starting from the same place, the guidance supports organizations to iteratively grow their sustainable purchasing efforts into a comprehensive sustainable purchasing program that enables the organization to take meaningful responsibility for all relevant environmental, social, and economic consequences of its spending. The guidance, when we first published it in version 1 in February of 2015, was organized into 4 chapters, which together provide a framework for the cross-functional collaboration necessary to build a strategic and leadership-capable sustainable purchasing program. Chapter 1 provides background. Chapters 2 and 3 focus on program design and operation. And then Chapter 4 is in-depth purchasing category guidance for those seeking to address key impacts and opportunities in specific areas of purchasing. Mm-hmm. Guidance is based on SPLC's principles for leadership and sustainable purchasing, which define what it means to be a responsible, that is a principled actor as an organization and within the marketplace. And organizations in a wide variety of sectors and regions can follow the strategic process detailed in the guidance to first understand the sustainability impacts of their purchased goods and services, second, identify actions that best address those priorities, and then third, benchmark progress toward their goals. At the heart of the guidance is a key message, and it can probably be best summed up in just one word, and it is the one word that is printed big and bold on the T-shirt we give out to our members at the annual summit, and that one word is prioritize. Yeah. For us, sustainable purchasing is all about being strategic, and to us that means prioritizing, figuring out for your own organization what are the actions that are appropriate priorities for you based on your organization, its priorities, its operating context, and then we provide the playbook both for how to develop those priorities, but then how to implement a meaningful and practical plan for delivering on those priorities through a sustainable purchasing program.
And so when you talk about prioritize and prioritization, then is it at the level of prioritize a category, prioritize a region or a geographic area, or is it prioritize on an output? We want to focus on this area of sustainability versus another area of sustainability.
Great question. And the answer is all of the above. Mm-hmm. We expect, within the guidance, we talk about something that we call a strategy cycle. And for us, it's a kind of generic format for developing priorities and then developing plans within those priorities. And we give some examples of how that might play out within an organization. But certainly for some organizations, their first step in prioritization based on the structure either of their procurement function or the data that they have available to them or the priorities that they've set, maybe to look at their supplier base and identify certain suppliers as priority suppliers with whom they want to engage on sustainability issues. And so see some organizations taking a supplier-driven approach. We'll see other organizations who are interested in looking across their portfolio of spending and identifying certain categories of spend as priority categories based on the strategic priorities of the organization. For example, we have a number of universities that have set ambitious GHG reduction targets, climate change associated GHG reduction targets. And so for them, they're looking at their spend and asking, of all the things that we spend money on, what are the items, what are the goods and services that are most relevant for reducing our overall carbon footprint, the overall GHG emissions footprint of our organization? And for a university, often that turns out to be categories like electricity purchasing, interestingly, food services based on the significant environmental and carbon footprint of food, vehicle fleets and transportation, employee travel. And so an organization like a university with those priorities might focus on those categories, and then we provide guidance on what you can do within some of those categories. It so happens that the categories that I mentioned, that is electricity, food services, transportation and fuels, and employee travel, are all categories on which we provide category level guidance as well. So for an organization that had prioritized those categories, we would be able to provide category level guidance on those categories as well. That's not true for all categories, but we've tried to select categories for which a large number of organizations are likely to be seeking guidance. But you also asked, I just want to go back and say, you asked about issue-based prioritization. It's certainly true that some organizations, as I was just hinting with the university, might choose to prioritize based on an issue and then filter that down into category-level prioritization, as I just described. Others might choose to address an issue across all categories. For example, many organizations care deeply about the diversity of their supply base, and their stakeholders care about that as well. So they might implement a supplier diversity program across all of their categories, and we provide some guidance about how to think about doing that as well.
And the question I had to kind of come back on categories was, you referenced 4 or 5 different categories there that you see organizations talk to you a lot about. I just wondered if there were any others that are kind of prime suspects, if you will, for a sustainability program that you didn't list there, but that a lot of organizations look at, because that'll give listeners an idea of, when they're looking at their own supplier portfolio and their own spend analytics, what are good candidates, what are good places to start?
Absolutely. So probably the best indication of that is the 8 categories around which we have convened technical advisory groups to develop category-specific guidance. And those 8 categories around which we've convened a technical advisory group and we've developed category-specific guidance are chemically intensive products, which would include and sanitizing, building maintenance products, and landscaping maintenance products. Construction and renovation, which would include building materials, but also construction contracts themselves. The electricity purchasing, food and beverages for food services, garments and linens, that's a new category for us, and we're just starting to develop guidance. IT hardware and services, that would include personal computers, on-site and cloud services, and electronic waste. Professional services, which is a large and diverse category, but I think many organizations are seeking guidance on how to think about that from a sustainability perspective. Transportation and fuels, which I referenced, that includes employee travel, institutional vehicle fleets, delivery services, freight, generator fuels, and steam plants. And then finally, wood and agri-fiber products, specifically office and janitorial paper products, and also lumber for building structures, though we tend to treat that more within the construction tag.
Great, that's extremely helpful. And kind of thinking about where to start and then doing a deeper dive on any one of those categories to figure out what specifically that entails and maybe what subcategories are within it. But the last question, as we look at the time here and start to wrap up, that I wanted to ask was around legislation. And so we had the Paris Agreement or Paris Accord back in, I think it was November, December, maybe it was ratified in March or April of this year. And I know that will impact the way that public institutions buy. Is that going to trickle down to private institutions? And is legislation going to impact, essentially force the hand of private enterprises as well as public institutions when it comes to buying sustainably? So
yes, it will, and in fact already does. So certainly the Paris Accords are tremendously important from a climate perspective. I would mention a few other laws and regulations that are relevant in our space. One is the increasing use of the Lacey Act in the United States to regulate imported products and to insist on a transparent supply chain for those imported products and legality within those supply chains. And then the REACH legislation in Europe, EU REACH legislation, which pertains specifically to chemical ingredients within products. Because of the influence that legislation has on the marketplace, simply by virtue of the strength of government purchasing as a force within the marketplace, already the market is responding. As a result, the supplier community is increasingly interested in seeing consistency between the procurement requests that it is getting from the private sector and the procurement requests it is getting from the public sector. And so it is in the interest of the supplier community that there be alignment between government action on procurement and private sector action on procurement. And because we already see government procurement entities starting to align themselves behind the policy priorities that have been established by international agreements like the Paris Accords, we are already starting to see demand from the supplier community, the private sector, also align itself with those accords simply in order to provide a consistent marketplace for competition and to really encourage the efficient workings of the marketplace. So I think there's an inevitable trickle-down effect, as you put it. I would also say that those regulations reflect a worldview that is the worldview of the citizens who are supporting the governments who are putting those regulations in place.
Yeah.
Those same citizens are also the customers of the business who are seeking to sell them goods and services. And so what we may see as a regulation in one place is simply what gets named a stakeholder concern in another place, but is no less relevant for a business And so whether it's a little hard to say whether it's the regulation trickling down,
right,
or simply the fact that our worldview is shifting, and as it shifts, our regulations are adapting and our private sector practices are adapting in response to customer demand and stakeholder demand.
Yes, so ultimately it becomes a sales imperative as much as a sustainability or an environmental or whatever the legislation is imperative, because it impacts brand and it talks to what consumers want to buy.
Absolutely.
So I need to wrap up. I just had one very final question, and that's, you started your journey, I think you said it was 2012 you came on board with the SPLC. What has anything surprised you, and it can be positive or negative, since you began your journey to really encourage supply chain sustainability through the SPLC and as you interacted with various different stakeholders?
Yeah, so great question. And I think what has been most surprising, and in a very positive way, has been how well sustainable purchasing aligns with three major themes that I've encountered at every major procurement event that I've attended as I try to educate myself to the field of procurement. Mm-hmm. And those are the themes of innovation, that is how to structure procurement processes to support and reward supplier innovation. The strategic role of procurement, that is how to elevate the strategic role of procurement within an organization. And then finally, talent retention, how to retain talented procurement staff and prevent their poaching by other functions or organizations. I hear those themes repeatedly at non-sustainability procurement events.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting to me is how well our conversation at the SPLC aligns with, supports, and even provides solutions for some of those conversations.
So where can listeners go to find out more and to continue the conversation?
Thanks for asking. Our website is sustainaBlepurchasing.org. Yep. And on that site, you can find a number of avenues for plugging into the dialogue around sustainable procurement, and including our events calendar, which always lists both public and member-only events and webinars that listeners can take part in. And I'd encourage listeners to sign up for our newsletter to receive monthly updates at sustainablepurchasing.org/receive-news.
All right, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to link to the how listeners can find out more, where they can go to your website, also some of the case studies. Those are all going to be at artofprocurement.com/SPLC. That's artofprocurement.com/SPLC. So, Jason, just one more time, thank you very much for joining me on the Art of Procurement today and for sharing your thoughts and sharing your guidance on how procurement leaders and professionals can really start to think about sustainability in their supply chains.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.